The bank door swung shut behind Zelda Morgan with a finality that echoed through her bones, and she stood frozen on the wooden sidewalk of Pendleton, Oregon, clutching a piece of paper that had just shattered her entire world into 1,000 irreparable pieces. It was October of 1882, and the autumn wind carried the smell of hay and horse manure through the dusty streets. But Zelda noticed none of it. Her hands trembled as she stared at the bank statement, reading the numbers over and over again, hoping somehow they would change, hoping this was all some terrible mistake. 2 years of careful saving, every penny she had earned from her seamstress work, every dollar her fiancé Thomas Whitfield had promised to contribute from his work at the grain mill, all of it was supposed to be here, waiting for them to start their new life together. They were supposed to have nearly $800 saved, enough to buy the little homestead just outside of town, enough to start a proper life as husband and wife. The account showed $12.37. Zelda felt her corset constricting her breathing, felt the world tilting sideways as she stumbled against the hitching post. A horse whinnied and shied away from her sudden movement, but she barely registered it. This had to be wrong. Mr. Henderson at the bank had to have made a mistake. But no, she had seen his face when he pulled out the ledger, had seen the pity in his eyes as he showed her the withdrawal slips, all signed in Thomas's bold handwriting. Regular withdrawals over the past 6 months, small at first, then growing larger and larger until just last week, when he had taken out nearly $300 in a single day. Her mind raced through the past months, looking for clues she had missed. Thomas had been different lately, more secretive, staying out later in the evenings. He had told her he was working extra hours at the mill, trying to add to their savings. She had believed him because she loved him, because they had been engaged for over a year, because she had trusted him with everything she had. Zelda walked mechanically down Main Street, not really seeing where she was going. Her pale blue dress, one of her better ones that she had worn specially to go to the bank to finalize their land purchase, now felt like a mockery. She had been so excited this morning, had braided her dark brown hair with extra care, had even worn her mother's cameo brooch. She was 23 years old and had thought her future was secure, mapped out with careful precision. She found herself standing outside the Golden Eagle Saloon without quite knowing how she had gotten there. This was where Thomas spent his evenings lately, though he always claimed he only went in for a quick drink with the mill workers before heading home. Zelda had never been inside a saloon in her life. Respectable women did not enter such establishments, but right now, with her entire world crumbling around her, respectability seemed like a luxury she could no longer afford. The doors swung open as a man stumbled out, already drunk though it was barely past noon. Zelda caught a glimpse of the interior, smoke-filled and dim, the sound of raucous laughter and clinking glasses spilling out into the street. She hesitated only a moment before stepping forward, but a voice stopped her. "I would not go in there if I were you, miss." Zelda turned to find a man standing beside the saloon, leaning against the wall with one boot propped up behind him. He was tall, probably in his mid-20s, with sun-bronzed skin and light brown hair that needed cutting, curling slightly at his collar. He wore working clothes, a worn chambray shirt and leather vest, dusty chaps over his denim pants, and a brown hat pushed back on his head. His face was angular and weathered, with the kind of lines around his eyes that spoke of too many days squinting into the harsh sun. But it was his eyes themselves that caught her attention, a striking blue-green that seemed to take in everything with a quiet, assessing intelligence. "I beg your pardon," Zelda said, straightening her spine. "I do not believe I asked for your opinion, sir." The cowboy pushed off from the wall with an easy grace, and she noticed the way he moved, careful and controlled, like a man used to being aware of his surroundings at all times. "No, you did not. But I have been watching you for the past 5 minutes, and you look like a woman about to make a decision she will regret. The Golden Eagle is no place for a lady, especially not in the middle of the day when the serious drinkers are holding court." "And what business is it of yours what I do?" Zelda demanded, though some of the fire went out of her words. She was exhausted suddenly, bone-deep tired in a way she had never experienced before. The cowboy studied her face for a long moment, and she had the uncomfortable sensation that he was seeing far more than she wanted to reveal. "None at all, I suppose, but I recognize that look you are wearing. I have seen it before. You just found out something that turned your whole life upside down, and now you are standing here trying to decide whether to go in there and confront whoever is responsible or walk away and try to salvage what is left." Zelda felt tears prick at her eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. She would not cry in front of a stranger on the street. "You know nothing about me or my situation." "True enough," the cowboy agreed, his voice surprisingly gentle. "But I know what I see, and what I see is a good woman who has been done wrong, probably by a man who did not deserve her in the first place." He paused, then added, "Thomas Whitfield is in there, if that is who you are looking for. He has been in there since about 10 this morning, playing poker at the back table. He is already down about $50 from what I can tell." The words hit Zelda like a physical blow. $50. He was gambling away what little remained of their money while she stood outside, her dreams dissolving like morning mist. "How do you know about Thomas?" The cowboy shrugged. "I have been in Pendleton for about a week, working odd jobs, trying to earn enough to move my herd through to winter pasture. I have spent a few evenings in the Golden Eagle, and I have seen your Thomas in there most nights. He is a regular at the poker tables, and from what I can tell, he is not very good at it." Zelda felt the last of her composure cracking. "He told me he was working extra hours. He said we were going to buy the Henderson place, said we would be married by Christmas." Her voice broke on the last word, and she pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to hold back the sob that threatened to escape. The cowboy glanced up and down the street, then gently took her elbow. "Come on, let us get you off the street before you become the talk of the town. There is a cafe just around the corner where we can sit and you can collect yourself." Zelda knew she should pull away, should tell this stranger to leave her alone. But she was so tired, and her legs felt like they might give out at any moment, so she let him guide her down the sidewalk to a small establishment with gingham curtains in the windows. The sign above the door read, "Maggie's Cafe," in cheerful yellow letters. Inside, it was warm and smelled of fresh bread and coffee. Only a few patrons occupied the tables, and the cowboy led her to a corner booth where they would have some privacy. A plump woman with kind eyes and graying hair approached them, wiping her hands on her apron. "Bennett Jackson, I have not seen you in here for a few days," the woman said warmly. Then her gaze shifted to Zelda, and her expression grew concerned. "Oh, honey, are you all right? You look like you have had a terrible shock." Bennett Jackson. So, that was his name. Zelda tried to compose herself, but she knew her face must be showing every emotion roiling through her. "I am fine, thank you. Just a difficult morning?" Maggie, for that was clearly who she was, did not look convinced, but she was too tactful to press. "I will bring you both some coffee and some of my apple pie. That always helps, I find." She bustled away before either of them could respond. Zelda sat in the booth, her hands folded tightly in her lap, staring at the worn wood of the table. Bennett settled across from her, taking off his hat and setting it on the bench beside him. His hair was lighter where his hat had protected it from the sun, and there was a faint line across his forehead, marking where the brim usually sat. "I apologize," Zelda said quietly. "I do not usually fall apart in front of strangers. I do not know what came over me." "No need to apologize," Bennett said. "Finding out someone you trusted has betrayed you is about as hard as it gets. You are entitled to fall apart a little." Maggie returned with 2 cups of coffee and generous slices of apple pie, still warm from the oven. She set them down with a motherly pat on Zelda's shoulder, then left them alone again. Zelda wrapped her hands around the coffee cup, grateful for the warmth. "I went to the bank this morning to finalize the purchase of a homestead. Thomas and I have been engaged for over a year. We were supposed to get married in December, right before Christmas. We had been saving every penny we could." She took a shaky breath. "The account was supposed to have nearly $800 in it. There was $12 left." Bennett let out a low whistle. "That is a considerable amount of money to lose." "He did not lose it," Zelda said bitterly. "He stole it. Mr. Henderson showed me the withdrawal slips. Thomas has been taking it out for months, a little at a time at first, then more and more. And apparently, he has been gambling it away in that saloon while telling me he was working extra hours to add to our savings." She laughed, but it came out harsh and broken. "What a fool I have been." "You are not a fool for trusting someone you loved," Bennett said firmly. "He is the one who broke that trust. That is on him, not you." Zelda looked up at him then, really looked at him for the first time. There was something solid about Bennett Jackson, something steady and genuine that made her want to believe him. He had the weathered look of a man who had spent most of his life outdoors, working hard. But there was also an intelligence in his eyes and a kindness in his expression that surprised her. "You said you have been in town for a week?" she asked, partly to change the subject, partly because she was genuinely curious. Where are you from? All over, really, Bennett said, taking a sip of his coffee. I grew up in Texas, but I have been working cattle drives and ranch work throughout the territories for the past 8 years. I have been saving up to buy my own land, start my own herd. I have about 50 head of cattle right now, grazing on rented land just outside of town. I was hoping to earn enough here in Pendleton to get them through the winter, and maybe buy a small piece of property come spring. That sounds like a good plan, Zelda said. Much better than mine turned out to be. Bennett pushed the pie toward her. Eat something. You look like you have not had a proper meal in days. Zelda realized he was right. She had been too excited to eat breakfast that morning, and now her stomach was churning with anxiety and anger. But the pie did look good, and she suddenly felt ravenously hungry. She took a bite, and the sweetness of the apples and the flaky crust melted on her tongue. It was delicious. They sat in silence for a few minutes while she ate, and Zelda found herself grateful for Bennett's quiet presence. He did not try to fill the silence with meaningless platitudes or awkward conversation. He just sat there, solid and calm, drinking his coffee and occasionally glancing out the window at the street. Finally, Zelda set down her fork and said, I need to confront him. I need to hear him explain why he did this. Bennett nodded slowly. I figured you would say that, but maybe wait until he comes out of the saloon. Going in there will only make things worse, and you will have every gossip in town talking about you by sundown. I do not particularly care what people say about me anymore, Zelda said, though she knew he was right. My reputation is likely ruined anyway once word gets out that my engagement is broken. Is it broken? Bennett asked. Have you decided that for certain? Zelda stared at him. He stole everything I had and gambled it away. What else is there to decide? Nothing, I suppose, Bennett said. I just wanted to make sure you were clear on that in your own mind before you face him. A man like Thomas Whitfield will try to talk his way out of it, make promises, tell you it will never happen again. You need to be absolutely certain of what you want before you give him that chance. The door to the cafe opened, and Zelda glanced up to see Thomas himself walk in, looking rumpled and agitated. He had not seen her yet, had not noticed her sitting in the corner booth. He went straight to the counter where Maggie was wiping down the surface. Maggie, have you seen Zelda Morgan come through here? Thomas asked, his voice carrying across the small space. Someone said they saw her walking this way, and I need to find her. Zelda stood up before Maggie could answer, and Thomas turned at the movement. His face went pale when he saw her, and then he seemed to notice Bennett sitting across from her, and his expression darkened. Zelda, there you are, Thomas said, walking toward their booth with forced casualness. I have been looking everywhere for you. What are you doing here with this stranger? Thomas Whitfield was a reasonably handsome man, Zelda supposed, though she was seeing him through new eyes now. He was of average height, with dark hair and brown eyes, with the soft hands of someone who worked indoors. He wore a good suit, better than he should have been able to afford on his mill wages, and she wondered bitterly how much of their savings had gone toward his wardrobe. This stranger has shown me more kindness and honesty in the past hour than you have in months, Zelda said, her voice steady despite the fury building in her chest. And I have been at the bank this morning, Thomas. I know what you did. Thomas's face flushed, and he glanced around the cafe nervously. The few other patrons were trying to pretend they were not listening, but Zelda could see their ears practically twitching with interest. Zelda, sweetheart, let us not discuss this here. Come outside and we can talk privately. No, Zelda said flatly. You can explain yourself right here, right now. Where is our money, Thomas? Where is the $800 we saved together for our future? Thomas reached for her hand, but she pulled away. It is not what you think, Zelda. I can explain everything. There was an investment opportunity, a sure thing. I was trying to multiply our savings, make it so we could afford an even better property. But there were some unexpected setbacks. Unexpected setbacks, Zelda repeated, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Is that what you call gambling away everything we had? Because Mr. Henderson showed me the withdrawal slips. Thomas, he showed me how you have been systematically draining our account for 6 months. Bennett had stood up when Thomas approached, and though he had not said anything, his presence beside Zelda was clearly making Thomas nervous. Thomas glared at him. Who are you, and why are you involved in my private business with my fiancé? Bennett Jackson, Bennett said calmly. And I am involved because your fiancé was about to walk into a saloon to confront you, and I thought she deserved better than to ruin her reputation over a man who clearly does not value her." "How dare you?" Thomas sputtered, his face going even redder. "You have no right to interfere between us." "He has more right than you have to steal from me," Zelda said. "Tell me the truth, Thomas. All of it. Did you gamble away our money?" Thomas's jaw worked, and she could see him trying to calculate what story would work best, what lie might still salvage this situation. Finally, perhaps seeing something in her face that told him lies would no longer work, he said, "There were some poker games, yes, but it started as an investment, I swear. I was winning at first, making real money. I thought I could double what we had saved, maybe even triple it. But then my luck turned, and I kept thinking if I just played a little longer, I could win it all back." "But you did not win it back," Zelda said. "You kept losing, and you kept taking more of our money, lying to me about working extra hours, while you threw away our entire future on cards." "I can fix this," Thomas said desperately. "I have a line on a new job, better pay. We can save it all back in a year, maybe less. We will just postpone the wedding a little while, and everything will be fine." Zelda looked at him, really looked at him, and wondered how she had ever thought she loved this man. Had he always been this weak, this selfish? Or had she simply been too blinded by her own dreams of marriage and security to see the truth? "No, Thomas, we will not be postponing anything because there will be no wedding. I am breaking our engagement." Thomas's eyes widened in shock. "You cannot mean that. Zelda, we have been planning this for over a year. What will people say? What will you do? A woman alone with no prospects?" "I will figure something out," Zelda said, twisting the engagement ring off her finger. It was a small thing, a modest gold band with a tiny chip of a diamond, and she wondered now if he had bought it with her own money. She held it out to him. "But whatever I do, it will be better than tying myself to a liar and a thief." Thomas stared at the ring, but did not take it. "You are making a mistake, Zelda. You are not getting any younger. How many other chances do you think you will get?" The cruelty of the words stung, but before Zelda could respond, Bennett stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. "I think you should leave now, Whitfield. The lady has made her feelings clear." Thomas looked at Bennett, seemed to measure him, and apparently decided he did not like his chances in any kind of physical confrontation. He snatched the ring from Zelda's hand. "Fine, but do not come crying to me when you realize what you have given up. You will be a spinster seamstress for the rest of your life, and you will have no one to blame but yourself." He stormed out of the cafe, slamming the door behind him. The silence that followed was deafening. Zelda stood there, shaking, unable to quite believe what had just happened. In the span of a few hours, her entire life had been dismantled. Maggie came over, her face sympathetic. "Oh, honey, I am so sorry, but for what it is worth, I think you did the right thing. Thomas Whitfield has been trouble for as long as I have known him. You are better off without him." Zelda nodded mutely, not trusting her voice. Bennett gently guided her back into the booth, and she sat down heavily. The other patrons had returned to their own conversations, though Zelda knew that by evening everyone in Pendleton would know that she had broken her engagement to Thomas Whitfield. "You dodged a bullet," Bennett said quietly, sitting across from her again. "I know it does not feel like it right now, but you did. Better to find out what kind of man he is before you married him than after." Zelda wanted to argue, wanted to rage against the unfairness of it all, but she found she did not have the energy. Instead, she asked, "What do I do now? Thomas was right about one thing. I have no prospects, no savings, nothing." "You have your skills," Bennett pointed out. "You said you are a seamstress. That is valuable work." "I rent a small room above Mrs. Patterson's boarding house and take in sewing to pay for it," Zelda said. "It is enough to survive, but barely. I was counting on marriage to Thomas to provide security, a home of my own. Now I will spend the rest of my life scraping by, alone." She hated how defeated she sounded, but it was the truth. Bennett was quiet for a moment, then he said, "Can I ask you something? What did you want before Thomas? Before you got engaged and started planning a life with him? What did you dream about?" The question surprised her. No one had asked her that in years. She thought back to when she was younger, before her parents died, before the realities of survival had narrowed her world down to the immediate necessities. "I wanted to have my own dress shop," she said slowly, "not just taking in mending and alterations, but actually designing and creating beautiful gowns. My mother taught me to sew when I was small, and I loved it, the way you could take plain fabric and turn it into something elegant and special. I used to sketch designs in a little notebook I kept hidden under my mattress. Do you still have that notebook? Bennett asked. Yes, but what does it matter? Dreams do not pay the rent or put food on the table. They might if you let them, Bennett said. Look, I know this is probably not the time, and you have every reason to tell me to mind my own business, but I have a proposition for you. Zelda looked at him warily. What kind of proposition? I need help, Bennett said. I have been doing odd jobs around town to earn money, but what I really need is someone who knows Pendleton, knows the people and the merchants, someone who could help me find buyers for some of my cattle, negotiate fair prices, that sort of thing. In return, I would split the profits with you. It would not be a fortune, but it would be enough to keep you going while you figure out your next step. Zelda frowned. Why would you do that? You do not even know me. Bennett smiled, a slow, warm expression that transformed his face. Call it a gut feeling. You strike me as someone who is honest and hardworking, and those are qualities in short supply sometimes. Plus, I believe in helping people when I can. I have been where you are, had my plans fall apart through no fault of my own. Someone gave me a hand up when I needed it, and I am just passing that along. It was tempting, more tempting than it should be. Zelda knew she should be suspicious of this stranger's kindness, should wonder what he really wanted from her. But looking into his steady blue-green eyes, she found herself believing him. Maybe it was foolish, maybe she was just desperate, but she heard herself say, All right, I will help you. Bennett's smile widened. Good. We can start tomorrow if you are up for it. I need to meet with some ranchers south of town who might be interested in buying some of my herd. You can come with me, help me make a good impression. Ranchers tend to trust a man more when he has a respectable woman vouching for him. They spent the next hour discussing the details, and Zelda found herself relaxing despite everything that had happened that morning. Bennett was easy to talk to, with a dry sense of humor that surprised her, and a straightforward way of speaking that she appreciated after Thomas's constant evasions and half-truths. When they finally left the cafe, the sun was past its midpoint in the sky. Bennett walked with her back toward Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, leading his horse, a sturdy bay gelding with intelligent eyes. Thank you, Zelda said when they reached her door, for everything today. I do not know what I would have done if you had not stopped me from going into that saloon. You would have figured something out, Bennett said. You are stronger than you think, Zelda Morgan. I can see that about you. Zelda felt a flush creep up her cheeks, and she was not entirely sure why. I will meet you tomorrow morning then. Where should I find you? I am staying at the livery stable, sleeping in the loft. The owner lets me stay there in exchange for mucking out the stalls. Meet me there at 7, and we will ride out to the ranches together. After Bennett left, Zelda climbed the stairs to her small room, her mind whirling with everything that had happened. She looked around at the cramped space, at the narrow bed and the small table where she did her sewing by lamplight. This had been her life for the past 3 years, ever since her parents had died within months of each other, her father from a bad fall and her mother from pneumonia. She had been 20 when she found herself suddenly alone in the world, and Thomas had seemed like a safe harbor, a promise of stability and belonging. But he had been a lie, just another loss in a life that had already seen too much of it. Zelda pulled out the notebook Bennett had asked about, the one filled with her dress designs. She flipped through the pages, looking at sketches she had not studied in months. They were good, she thought with some surprise. Not perfect, certainly, but creative and elegant. If she had the money and the connections, she really could open her own shop. But she did not have those things, and wishing would not make them appear. Still, as she got ready for bed that night, Zelda found herself thinking not about what she had lost, but about Bennett Jackson's words. You dodged a bullet. Maybe he was right. Maybe this disaster was actually an opportunity in disguise. She would find out tomorrow. The next morning dawned clear and cool, and Zelda dressed carefully in her most practical outfit, a dark green riding skirt and a simple white blouse with a brown jacket. She braided her hair in a single plait down her back and pinned on a sensible hat. Looking at herself in the small mirror above her washstand, she barely recognized the woman staring back at her. Yesterday, she had been an engaged woman preparing for her wedding. Today she was something else entirely, something she had not yet defined. Bennett was waiting for her at the livery stable as promised, and he had a horse saddled and ready for her, a gentle mare with a sweet face. "Her name is Clover," Bennett said as he helped Zelda mount. "She belongs to the livery owner, but he said we could borrow her for the day." They rode out of Pendleton as the town was waking up, shopkeepers opening their doors and early risers heading to work. Zelda caught a few curious glances but ignored them. Let people wonder. She had more important things to worry about now. The land around Pendleton was beautiful in the autumn light, rolling hills covered in golden grass with the blue mountains rising in the distance. The air smelled clean and fresh, and Zelda realized how long it had been since she had been outside of town, really outside, away from the dust and noise and constant press of people. Bennett rode beside her in comfortable silence for a while, and Zelda appreciated that he did not feel the need to fill every moment with conversation. Finally, he said, "The first ranch we are heading to belongs to a man named Carl Peterson. He is a fair dealer from what I hear, but tough. He will not pay more than he thinks the cattle are worth, but he will not cheat us either." "What do you need me to do?" Zelda asked. "Just be yourself," Bennett said. "Let him see that I am a man who keeps respectable company, someone who can be trusted. And if you notice anything in the negotiations that seems off, speak up. Sometimes a fresh perspective catches things the rest of us miss." They reached the Peterson Ranch around mid-morning, a well-maintained spread with a sturdy house and several outbuildings. Carl Peterson turned out to be a grizzled man in his 50s with sharp eyes and a firm handshake. He greeted Bennett cordially and tipped his hat to Zelda with old-fashioned courtesy. "This is Miss Zelda Morgan," Bennett introduced her. "She is helping me with my business dealings while I'm in the area." Peterson's eyes flickered with interest. "Morgan, are you related to William Morgan, who used to have the leather goods shop in town?" "He was my father," Zelda said, surprised that Peterson would remember. "Good man, your father," Peterson said. "Honest in all his dealings. I was sorry to hear about his passing." He turned back to Bennett. "Any friend of William Morgan's daughter is someone I can do business with. Let us go look at these cattle you want to sell." The negotiations took most of the morning, with Peterson examining Bennett's cattle thoroughly, asking detailed questions about their health and breeding. Zelda watched and listened, and she noticed that Peterson was trying to lowball the price, claiming the market was soft, when she knew for a fact that beef prices had been rising steadily for months. She had overheard enough conversations at the mercantile to know that. "Excuse me, Mr. Peterson," she said politely but firmly, "but I believe the current market price for healthy cattle is actually higher than what you are offering. Mr. Miller at the mercantile was discussing just last week how the railroad is paying premium prices for beef to feed their work crews." Peterson looked at her with new respect, then laughed. "You are your father's daughter, all right. William always did have a head for numbers." He turned to Bennett. "She's right. I was hoping you would not know that. Fair enough. I will give you $1 more per head." They settled on a price that was more than fair, and Bennett sold Peterson 10 head of his cattle. As they rode away with Peterson's payment safely in Bennett's saddlebag, he turned to Zelda with a grin. "That was impressive. How did you know about the railroad prices?" "I listen," Zelda said simply. "People talk around me all the time, assuming I'm not paying attention. But I am always listening." They visited 2 more ranches that day, and at each one, Zelda proved her worth. She knew the local gossip, knew which ranchers had had good years and which were struggling, knew the web of relationships and grudges that connected the people in the area. By the time they rode back to Pendleton that evening, Bennett had sold 25 head of cattle for far better prices than he had hoped. "Your share," Bennett said, counting out bills into Zelda's hand. $40, not bad for a day's work." Zelda stared at the money. It was more than she usually made in a month of sewing. "This is too much. I did not do anything that difficult." "You did exactly what I needed," Bennett said, "and a deal is a deal. Besides, I have a feeling this is just the beginning. If you are willing to keep helping me, I think we could both do well." Over the next few weeks, Zelda and Bennett fell into a routine. They would ride out to various ranches and farms in the area, and Bennett would negotiate sales of his cattle, while Zelda provided local knowledge and a respectable presence. In between these trips, Zelda continued her sewing work, but now she had money to buy better fabric and supplies. She even started taking on more ambitious projects, designing a dress for Mrs. Patterson's daughter that turned out so beautifully that other women began asking for similar work. She also found herself spending more and more time with Bennett, and not just for business purposes. He would stop by the boarding house in the evenings, and they would walk through town together, talking about everything and nothing. Zelda learned that Bennett had left Texas after his parents died in a cholera outbreak when he was 17. He had worked on cattle drives for years, saving every penny, determined to build something of his own. He was 26 now, and so close to his dream of owning his own ranch that he could taste it. "What will you do when you get your land?" Zelda asked one evening as they sat on the porch of the boarding house, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Build a house first," Bennett said. "Nothing fancy, just solid and weatherproof. Then I will focus on building the herd, improving the bloodlines, maybe eventually supplying cattle to the railroad on a regular basis. It will be hard work, but it will be mine." "It sounds wonderful," Zelda said wistfully. Bennett looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "What about you? What will you do?" "I have been thinking about that," Zelda admitted. "Mrs. Patterson mentioned that the space next to her boarding house is available to rent. It used to be a millinery shop, but the owner moved away. It is small, but it would be perfect for a dress shop. With what I have been earning helping you, and if I can get a few more commissions like the one I just finished, I might actually be able to afford the rent." "You should do it," Bennett said immediately. "You are talented, Zelda. I have seen the dresses you make. Women would line up for that kind of quality." Zelda felt a glow of warmth at his words. Thomas had never encouraged her dreams, had always dismissed her sewing as just a way to pass the time until they were married, but Bennett seemed to genuinely believe in her abilities. "Maybe I will," she said softly. As November arrived and the weather turned colder, Zelda found herself thinking less and less about Thomas and what might have been, and more about what actually was. She was building something real, something that belonged to her alone. She had rented the shop space and was slowly fixing it up, painting the walls a soft cream color and installing better lighting. She had even painted a sign to hang above the door, "Morgan's Dressmaking and Design." And she was falling in love with Bennett Jackson. It happened gradually, in small moments, the way he always made sure she was comfortable before seeing to his own needs, the way he listened when she talked, really listened, asking thoughtful questions and remembering details she had mentioned days earlier, the way he looked at her sometimes, like she was something precious and rare, the way his hand felt when he helped her mount her horse, strong and warm and steady. She tried to tell herself it was too soon, that she was just rebounding from her broken engagement to Thomas. But this felt nothing like what she had felt for Thomas. That had been comfortable and safe, or so she had thought. This was different, exciting and terrifying and utterly consuming. One day in late November, they were riding back from a successful negotiation with a rancher near La Grande when storm clouds began rolling in from the west. Bennett eyed them with concern. "We need to find shelter. That looks like it could get nasty." They urged their horses to a faster pace, but the storm moved faster. Within minutes, rain was pouring down in sheets, and thunder rumbled across the sky. Bennett spotted an old line shack in the distance, one of the small cabins that ranchers maintain for their cowboys during roundups and long drives. They rode hard for it, and by the time they reached the shelter, they were both soaked to the skin. The shack was small but dry, with a fireplace and a stack of wood that someone had thoughtfully left behind. Bennett quickly got a fire going, while Zelda tried to wring out her skirt. Her teeth were chattering, and she could not seem to stop shivering. "You need to get out of those wet clothes," Bennett said, his voice rough with concern. "There should be some old blankets in that trunk over there. I will turn my back while you change." Zelda's hands shook too much to manage the buttons on her blouse. "I cannot," she said, frustrated and embarrassed. "My fingers will not work properly." Bennett hesitated, then said, "I can help, if you will let me. I promise I will be a perfect gentleman." Zelda nodded, too cold to care about propriety anymore. Bennett approached her carefully, and with gentle, efficient movements, he helped her out of her wet jacket and began unbuttoning her blouse. His hands were warm against her cold skin, and Zelda found herself shivering for an entirely different reason now. "Zelda," Bennett said softly, his hands stilling on the third button, "I need to tell you something." "What?" she whispered. "I am falling in love with you," he said, meeting her eyes. "I know it is too soon, and I know you have been through hell with Thomas. The last thing I want is to push you into something you are not ready for. But I cannot keep pretending that this is just a business arrangement. You mean more to me than that." Zelda felt her heart stutter in her chest. Bennett, She stopped, trying to find the right words. I am falling in love with you too. I think I have been for weeks now. The smile that spread across Bennett's face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. Yeah? Yeah, Zelda confirmed, and then he was kissing her, soft and sweet and perfect. She wrapped her arms around his neck, pressing closer, and his arms came around her waist, holding her like she was something infinitely valuable. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Bennett rested his forehead against hers. We should probably get you into those dry blankets before you catch pneumonia. Zelda laughed, and it felt good, felt right. They took care of practical matters, Bennett turning away while Zelda stripped out of her wet clothes and wrapped herself in the rough wool blankets from the trunk. Then they sat together by the fire, and Bennett pulled her close against his side, and they talked quietly while the storm raged outside. They talked about everything, their pasts, their hopes, their fears. Bennett told her about growing up in Texas, about learning to rope cattle before he could read properly, about the crushing grief of losing his parents and finding himself adrift. Zelda told him about her happy childhood, about learning to sew at her mother's knee, about the devastating loneliness of the past 3 years. I thought Thomas was my only chance, she admitted. I was so afraid of being alone forever that I ignored all the signs that he was not a good man. I made excuses for him, told myself that marriage was about compromise and practicality, not love. You deserve better than that, Bennett said fiercely. You deserve someone who sees how amazing you are, who would never dream of betraying your trust or wasting what you have built together. Someone like you? Zelda asked, looking up at him. I would like to think so, Bennett said. I can promise you this, Zelda. I will never lie to you, never steal from you, never make you feel like you are anything less than extraordinary, because that is what you are to me. They stayed in the line shack until the storm passed, which took most of the afternoon. By the time they rode back to Pendleton, it was evening, and Zelda knew that they would cause talk, disappearing together for an entire day. But she found she did not care. Let people gossip. She had found something real, something worth fighting for. As December arrived, Zelda's dress shop began to take off. Word had spread about her designs, and she had more commissions than she could handle. She hired 2 other seamstresses to help her, young women who needed work and were grateful for the opportunity. Bennett continued to sell his cattle, making excellent profits thanks to Zelda's business sense and local knowledge. One evening, as they were closing up the shop together, Bennett said, I need to tell you something. Zelda looked up from the ledger she was updating. What is it? I have enough money now, Bennett said. Enough to buy the land I've been eyeing, a good piece of property about 5 miles south of town. It has a creek running through it, good grazing, and a spot that would be perfect for a house. Bennett, that is wonderful, Zelda exclaimed, throwing her arms around him. But then she pulled back, seeing something uncertain in his expression. Why do you not look happier about it? Because I do not want to go out there alone, Bennett said. I want you to come with me, as my wife, if you will have me. Zelda's breath caught. Are you proposing to me? I know it is fast, Bennett said, taking her hands in his. We have only known each other for 2 months, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you, Zelda. I love your strength and your intelligence and your kindness. I love the way you scrunch up your nose when you are concentrating on a difficult stitch. I love your laugh and your stubbornness, and the way you see the best in people even when they do not deserve it. I want to build a life with you, not just a ranch but a real home, a family. Will you marry me? Zelda felt tears streaming down her face, but they were happy tears this time. Yes, she said. Yes, I will marry you. Bennett let out a whoop of joy and spun her around, both of them laughing. When he set her down, he kissed her thoroughly, and Zelda felt like her heart might burst from happiness. They were married 2 weeks before Christmas in a simple ceremony at the small church in Pendleton. Maggie from the cafe stood up as Zelda's witness, and the livery stable owner stood up for Bennett. Zelda wore a dress she had made herself, a beautiful creation in cream-colored silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. She had never felt more beautiful in her life, especially when she saw the look on Bennett's face as she walked down the aisle toward him. Mrs. Patterson closed the boarding house for the afternoon so that everyone could come to the wedding breakfast she insisted on hosting. It was a joyful celebration, and Zelda looked around at the faces of the people who had become her friends and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Just 3 months ago, she had stood outside the bank with her world in ruins. Now she was married to a man she loved desperately, with a thriving business and a future that seemed bright with possibility. She did see Thomas once as they were leaving the church. He was standing across the street, watching the celebration with a sour expression. When he caught her eye, he turned and walked away. Zelda felt only pity for him, mixed with profound gratitude that she had discovered his true nature before it was too late. "You really did dodge a bullet," she murmured to Bennett as they climbed into the wagon for the ride out to their new property. Bennett smiled and pulled her close. "We both dodged bullets, I think, and found something much better instead." The land Bennett had bought was even more beautiful than Zelda had imagined. The creek ran clear and cold, lined with cottonwood trees that would provide shade in the summer. The spot Bennett had chosen for the house overlooked a gentle valley where his cattle grazed, with the Blue Mountains providing a stunning backdrop. The house itself was still under construction, but the basic structure was sound. It would have a large main room with a stone fireplace, 2 bedrooms, and a kitchen with a real stove. Bennett had even insisted on including a separate room that could serve as Zelda's sewing studio, with big windows to let in plenty of natural light. "I know you will want to keep designing," he had said when he showed her the plans. "Just because we are married does not mean you have to give up your dreams. We can make this work for both of us." They moved into the house in January of 1883, even though parts of it were still unfinished. It did not matter. They had a roof over their heads and each other, and that was enough. They spent their days working hard, Bennett managing the cattle and finishing the house, while Zelda divided her time between the ranch and her shop in town. She had turned the day-to-day management of the shop over to her 2 assistants, but she still designed all the dresses and handled the most important commissions. Their first winter together was hard, but happy. There were storms that kept them snowed in for days at a time, frozen pipes and sick cattle, and 1,000 small disasters that come with building a life from nothing. But they faced each challenge together, and Zelda found a strength in herself that she had never known existed. She learned to handle a rifle, learned to help with the cattle when Bennett needed an extra pair of hands, learned to make a decent stew over an open fire when the stove stopped working. Bennett, in turn, learned to appreciate the finer points of dress design, listening patiently, while Zelda explained the difference between various types of lace and offering surprisingly good opinions on color combinations. He learned to braid her hair when her hands were too sore from sewing, and he always made sure to tell her how beautiful she looked, even when she was covered in dust and exhausted from a long day's work. Spring arrived with a rush of green across the valley, and Zelda discovered she was pregnant. She told Bennett one morning in April, as they sat on the porch watching the sunrise, and the joy on his face made her fall in love with him all over again. "A baby," he kept saying, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby." Their son was born in December of 1883, a healthy boy with Bennett's blue-green eyes and an impressive set of lungs. They named him William, after Zelda's father, and called him Will. Bennett was a devoted father from the first moment, walking the floor with Will when he cried in the night, changing diapers without complaint, talking to him constantly, even though the baby was too young to understand. Watching Bennett with their son, Zelda often thought about how different her life would have been if Thomas had not shown his true colors. She would have been trapped in a loveless marriage with a man who saw her only as a convenience, not a partner. She never would have known what real love felt like, never would have had the courage to chase her dreams. When Will was 6 months old, Zelda received a letter that shocked her. It was from a woman in Portland who had seen one of Zelda's designs on a visitor to that city, and wanted to know if Zelda would be interested in supplying dresses to a high-end boutique there. The woman was offering prices that made Zelda's head spin. "You should do it," Bennett said immediately when she showed him the letter. "This could be exactly what you need to expand the business." "But it would mean traveling to Portland, being away from you and Will," Zelda protested. "Not if we all go together," Bennett said. "I need to make connections with bigger markets anyway. We could make it a family trip, turn it into an adventure." So they did. They traveled to Portland that summer, and Zelda negotiated a contract that would supply 2 dresses per month to the boutique. It was prestigious work that would significantly increase her income and her reputation. Bennett also made valuable connections with cattle buyers in Portland, expanding his market considerably. The years that followed were good ones. They had two more children, a daughter named Sarah in 1885 and another son named James in 1887. The ranch prospered, with Bennett gradually increasing his herd and improving his stock through careful breeding. Zelda's dress shop became famous throughout the Oregon Territory, and women traveled from as far as Seattle to commission her designs. They worked hard, but they also made time for joy. Bennett taught Will to ride as soon as the boy was old enough to sit a horse, and Zelda taught Sarah to sew, passing on the skills her own mother had taught her. They had picnics by the creek on summer afternoons and spent winter evenings gathered around the fireplace, Bennett reading aloud while Zelda sewed and the children played. Zelda never forgot what Bennett had done for her, how he had appeared in her life at the exact moment she needed him most. She never forgot the kindness of a stranger who had seen her standing outside that saloon, devastated and lost, and had offered her a way forward. One evening in the summer of 1890, when Will was 6, Sarah was 5, and James was 3, Zelda and Bennett sat on their porch watching the sunset after putting the children to bed. The ranch sprawled around them, prosperous and beautiful, the result of years of hard work and dedication. Zelda's latest dress commission was finished and ready to ship to Portland, and Bennett had just closed a deal that would supply beef to a new hotel opening in Boise. "Do you ever think about that day?" Zelda asked softly, leaning against Bennett's shoulder. "The day we met?" "All the time," Bennett admitted. "I think about what might have happened if I had not been standing outside the saloon at that exact moment. Would you have gone in? Would you have confronted Thomas?" "Probably," Zelda said. "And I would have made a terrible scene and ruined my reputation completely. My life would have been so much harder." "Or maybe you would have found your strength anyway," Bennett said. "I like to think that you would have figured it out one way or another. You are the strongest person I know, Zelda." Zelda smiled. "I am only strong because I have you beside me. We make each other better, I think." "We do," Bennett agreed, kissing the top of her head. "I meant what I said that day, you know. You dodged a bullet with Thomas Whitfield." "I know," Zelda said, "and I found something so much better. I found my partner, my best friend, the love of my life. I found home." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold. From inside the house, they could hear the faint sound of James waking from a bad dream, and Zelda started to get up. But Bennett stopped her. "I will go," he said, standing. "You stay here and enjoy the sunset." Zelda watched him disappear into the house, heard his gentle voice soothing their youngest son, and felt a wave of contentment wash over her. Life was good. Better than good. It was everything she had ever wanted, and so much more than she had dared to dream. She thought about Thomas sometimes, wondered what had become of him. She had heard through the gossip network that he had left Pendleton not long after their broken engagement, headed to California to try his luck in some new scheme. She hoped he had found happiness, or at least peace, but she did not waste much energy on wondering. That part of her life was over, a closed chapter. Her life now was with Bennett and their children, with the ranch and her dress designs, with this beautiful piece of land they had built into something lasting and real. Every morning, when she woke up beside Bennett, every time she watched him play with their children, every time they worked side by side to overcome some new challenge, she felt grateful. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Will grew into a serious young man who loved working with his father on the ranch. Sarah inherited her mother's talent for design and spent hours in Zelda's studio, learning the intricacies of pattern making and sewing. James was the wild one, always getting into mischief, but with such charm that it was impossible to stay angry with him for long. Bennett's hair started to show threads of silver at the temples, and fine lines appeared at the corners of Zelda's eyes. But they wore their aging like badges of honor, proof of a life well lived. They had weathered droughts and harsh winters, sick livestock and economic downturns, but they had survived it all together. In 1895, when Will was 12 and starting to take on real responsibility on the ranch, Zelda received another letter from Portland. The boutique owner who had been buying her designs for years was retiring and wanted to know if Zelda would be interested in buying the business. It was a tremendous opportunity, but it would require a significant investment and likely mean spending more time in Portland. Zelda showed Bennett the letter, expecting him to discourage her. The ranch demanded so much of their time already, and the children still needed their mother, but Bennett surprised her, as he often did. "You should do it," he said firmly. "This is your chance to expand beyond just designing. You could have a real empire, Zelda, shops in multiple cities. I believe you could do it." "But the children," Zelda protested. "And the ranch, how would we manage?" Bennett took her hands. "The same way we have managed everything else, together. We will figure it out. I did not marry you expecting you to give up your dreams for mine. We are partners, remember?" So Zelda bought the boutique in Portland, and over the next few years, she expanded it into 3 shops, one in Portland, one in Seattle, and one in Boise. She traveled regularly to oversee the businesses, sometimes alone, sometimes with Bennett and the children. It was exhausting and exhilarating, and Zelda loved every minute of it. Bennett continued to grow the ranch, eventually expanding to over 1,000 head of cattle and becoming one of the most respected ranchers in eastern Oregon. But no matter how busy they both became, they always made time for each other and for their family. Sunday dinners were sacred. Everyone gathered around the big table Bennett had built himself, sharing stories of the week and making plans for the future. In 1898, when Zelda was 39 years old, she found out she was pregnant again, a surprise after 11 years. Their 4th child, a daughter they named Mary, was born in early 1899, and she brought a new energy to the household. Will was 15 then, Sarah was 14, and James was 12, and they all doted on their baby sister. One evening, when Mary was about 6 months old, Zelda sat in her rocking chair on the porch, nursing the baby and watching Bennett work with Will in the corral. Sarah was inside preparing dinner, and James was supposed to be doing his schoolwork, but was probably reading one of the adventure novels he loved instead. Zelda looked around at the life they had built and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. It had been 17 years since that terrible day when she had stood outside the bank, her dreams shattered, her future uncertain. 17 years since a cowboy she did not know had stopped her from making a terrible mistake and offered her a hand up when she needed it most. She thought about Bennett's words that day. "You dodged a bullet." He had been so right. Thomas would have destroyed her, would have dragged her down into his weakness and self-destruction. Instead, she had found Bennett, and together they had built something beautiful and lasting. The door opened behind her, and Sarah came out carrying 2 cups of tea. She was 14 now, and growing into a lovely young woman with Zelda's dark hair and Bennett's striking eyes. "I thought you might like some tea, Mama," Sarah said, settling into the chair beside her mother. "Thank you, sweetheart," Zelda said, carefully accepting the cup while keeping Mary nestled against her. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the men work with the horses. "Mama," Sarah said suddenly, "how did you know Papa was the right one? That he was the man you should marry?" Zelda smiled, remembering. "That is a complicated question. I was engaged to someone else when I met your father. Did you know that?" Sarah's eyes widened. "No, you never told me that." "It is not something I talk about often," Zelda admitted. "His name was Thomas, and I thought I loved him. But he betrayed my trust in a terrible way, and I broke our engagement. I met your father on the same day, actually, the worst day of my life up until that point. He helped me when I had no reason to expect kindness from a stranger." "What did he do?" Sarah asked, leaning forward with interest. "He saw me about to do something foolish, something that would have ruined my reputation, and he stopped me. He offered me tea and sympathy, and then he offered me a job helping him with his cattle business. That was how it started, just 2 people working together. But over time, I realized that he was everything Thomas was not. He was honest and kind and supportive. He believed in my dreams and helped me achieve them. He made me want to be better, stronger. When he proposed, I said yes because I could not imagine my life without him." Sarah was quiet for a moment, processing this. "Do you think you would have been happy if you had married Thomas?" "No," Zelda said without hesitation. "I would have been miserable. He was a weak man, selfish and dishonest. Your father once told me that I dodged a bullet, and he was absolutely right. Sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you turns out to be the best thing, because it pushes you towards something better." "I hope I find someone like Papa someday," Sarah said softly. "You will," Zelda assured her, "and you will know when you do, because he will make you feel like you can do anything, be anything. He will be your partner, not your master. That is what real love looks like." They sat together until the sun set. 3 generations of women, the past and the present and the future, all intertwined. Bennett and Will came in from the corral, dirty and tired, but satisfied with their work. James emerged from his room, schoolwork still unfinished, but ready with a funny story about something that had happened in town. They gathered around the table for dinner, this family that Zelda and Bennett had created together, and Zelda felt her heart swell with love. After the children were in bed that night, Zelda and Bennett lay together in their room, the window open to let in the cool night breeze. Mary slept in her cradle beside the bed, making soft baby sounds in her sleep. "Sarah asked me today how I knew you were the right one," Zelda said, tracing patterns on Bennett's chest with her finger. "What did you tell her?" Bennett asked, his voice rumbling under her ear. "I told her about Thomas, about that day we met, about how you saved me from myself and helped me find my strength." Bennett was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You know, I never told you this, but I almost did not stop you that day. I saw you standing there, looking so devastated, and my first instinct was to mind my own business. I told myself it was not my problem, that I had my own troubles to worry about." "What made you change your mind?" Zelda asked, lifting her head to look at him. "Honestly, I am not sure. Something about the look on your face, the way you were holding yourself together through sheer force of will. You reminded me of my mother, actually. She was like that, strong even when everything was falling apart. I thought, if I can help this woman the way I wish someone had helped my mother, then maybe it will mean something." "It meant everything," Zelda said, kissing him softly. "You changed my entire life, Bennett Jackson." "We changed each other's lives," Bennett corrected. "I was just a drifter with a dream before I met you. You gave me something to work for, someone to build a future with. You made me believe I could be more than just another cowboy scraping by." They made love then, slow and tender, the passion that had burned between them from the beginning still strong after all these years. Afterward, they lay tangled together, and Zelda felt completely at peace. The years continued their steady march forward. Will took over more and more of the ranch operations as Bennett started to slow down, not from illness, but simply from age and a desire to enjoy life a little more. Sarah married a nice young man from Portland who managed one of Zelda's shops, and they gave Zelda and Bennett their first grandchild in 1903. James, true to his adventurous nature, joined the cavalry and sent long letters home, describing his travels throughout the western states. Mary grew into a bright, curious child who seemed to inherit the best qualities of both her parents. In 1905, Zelda was 46 years old, and Bennett was 49. And they decided to take a trip, just the two of them, back to where they had first met. They stood outside what had been the Golden Eagle Saloon, long since renamed and turned into a respectable restaurant, and Zelda squeezed Bennett's hand. "I cannot believe it has been 23 years, she said. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago." "It was a lifetime ago," Bennett said. "We were different people then, younger, less certain of ourselves." "Speak for yourself," Zelda teased. "You seemed pretty certain when you stopped me from going into that saloon." "On the outside, maybe," Bennett admitted. "Inside, I was terrified you would tell me to mind my own business and go in anyway." They walked through Pendleton, seeing how the town had changed and grown. Maggie's Cafe was still there, though Maggie herself had passed away 2 years earlier, and her daughter ran it now. The bank where Zelda had learned of Thomas's betrayal was still operating, though Mr. Henderson had retired. Mrs. Patterson's boarding house had been torn down and replaced with a hotel. They visited the small shop where Zelda had started her dress business, now expanded into a larger space with her name prominently displayed on the sign. One of her original assistants, now a partner in the business, greeted them warmly and showed them the latest designs. "You built something amazing," Bennett said as they left the shop. "From nothing, you created an empire." "We built it together," Zelda corrected. "I could never have done any of this without you." They spent the night in the new hotel, and the next morning, they rode out to the spot where Bennett's line shack had been, where they had taken shelter from the storm all those years ago, and where Bennett had first told her he was falling in love with her. The shack was gone now, long since fallen into disrepair and dismantled, but the location was still beautiful, with a view that stretched for miles. "This is where everything changed," Zelda said softly. "This is where we went from being business partners to being something more." "Best decision I ever made," Bennett said, pulling her close. "Telling you how I felt. I was scared to death you would reject me." "Never," Zelda said firmly. "Not then, not now, not ever." They returned to the ranch renewed and refreshed, ready to continue building the life they had created together. The years kept passing, marked by births and deaths, successes and setbacks, all the ordinary joys and sorrows that make up a human life. In 1910, when Zelda was 51 and Bennett was 54, they celebrated their 27th wedding anniversary with a party that brought together their children, their grandchildren, and friends from all over the region. Will and his wife had given them 3 grandchildren. Sarah and her husband had 2, with a third on the way. James had finally settled down with a woman he met while stationed in Wyoming, and Mary, at 11 years old, was already showing signs of her mother's business acumen and her father's way with animals. At the party, held at the ranch under a clear summer sky, Zelda looked around at the crowd of people and felt overwhelmed by how blessed her life had been. If someone had told her that terrible day in October of 1882 that this would be her future, she never would have believed them. She had thought her life was over, thought she had lost her only chance at happiness and security. How wrong she had been. Bennett found her standing alone for a moment, watching the celebration, and wrapped his arms around her from behind. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, resting his chin on top of her head. "How grateful I am," Zelda said, "for all of this, for you most of all." "The feeling is entirely mutual," Bennett assured her. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Zelda Jackson." They danced that evening, moving slowly to music played by a local band, and Zelda rested her head on Bennett's shoulder and thought about a young cowboy who had once told her she had dodged a bullet. He had been right, but he had been too modest to mention that he had been the one to save her from that bullet, to offer her a way forward when she could see only darkness ahead. As they moved together under the stars, surrounded by the family they had created and the life they had built, Zelda sent up a silent prayer of thanks for the worst day of her life, the day that had led to all the best days that followed. She had lost everything that mattered to her in a single morning, only to discover that what she thought mattered had been an illusion all along. What mattered was, right here, holding her close, moving with her in the darkness, loving her with the same steady devotion he had shown for nearly 3 decades. What mattered was their children and grandchildren, laughing and dancing around them. What mattered was the ranch they had built together, the businesses they had created, the life they had forged out of nothing but determination and love. "I love you," Zelda whispered against Bennett's chest. "I love you too," Bennett replied. "Always have, always will." And as the music played and the stars wheeled overhead, Zelda knew with absolute certainty that every moment of heartbreak, every tear she had shed, every moment of doubt and fear had been worth it to arrive at this perfect moment. She had dodged a bullet indeed, but more importantly, she had found her home, her partner, her forever. Their story was not one of perfect fairy tale romance where everything came easily. It was better than that. It was a story of 2 people who had found each other at exactly the right moment, who had worked hard to build something lasting, who had weathered storms and celebrated triumphs, who had grown together rather than apart. It was a story of real love, the kind that deepens with time rather than fading, the kind that sustains through the hard times and makes the good times even sweeter. And as Zelda and Bennett grew older together, watching their children build their own lives and their grandchildren grow, they never forgot that first day, that terrible and wonderful day when everything changed. They told the story to their grandchildren sometimes, when they were old enough to understand, told them about the importance of trusting your instincts and being brave enough to walk away from what is wrong to find what is right. Bennett passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1920 at the age of 64, with Zelda holding his hand. He had lived long enough to see his children grown and successful, his grandchildren thriving, his ranch prosperous and secure. He had built the life he dreamed of and more, and he had done it with the woman he loved by his side. Zelda mourned him deeply, but she did not fall apart. Bennett had taught her too well, had shown her that she was stronger than she knew. She continued to run her dress shops, continued to be involved in the ranch that Will now managed, continued to be a central figure in her children's and grandchildren's lives. When people asked her about her marriage, about the secret to such a long and happy partnership, Zelda always said the same thing. "We were honest with each other, we supported each other's dreams, and we never stopped being grateful for what we had built together. And it all started because one day, a kind cowboy told me I had dodged a bullet, and then helped me build a life worth living." Zelda lived to the age of 72, passing away in 1931, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, secure in the knowledge that she had lived a full and meaningful life. Her dress shops continued to operate for decades, and the ranch she and Bennett had built remained in the family, passed down through the generations. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, her descendants would sit on the porch of that ranch house and tell the story of how it all began. Of a woman who lost everything and a cowboy who helped her find something better. Of love born from crisis and strengthened by time. They told the story of Zelda Morgan and Bennett Jackson, two people who had found each other when they needed it most, and built a legacy that would last long after they were gone. It was a love story for the ages, born in the Wild West, forged in hardship, and perfected through decades of partnership and devotion. And at its heart was a simple truth. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is really the best thing, because it opens the door to something you never knew you needed, something that will change your life forever in ways you cannot possibly imagine. Zelda had learned that lesson well, and she had lived it every day for the rest of her life, grateful beyond measure for the day she dodged a bullet and found her true home in the arms of a cowboy named Bennett Jackson.